The file was not supposed to matter. It had no priority flag, no active dispute, no pending escalation, just a timestamp, 412 years old. It lived deep inside the Cathari trade archives, buried beneath obsolete shipping logs and forgotten diplomatic notices, data that existed only because deletion required more effort than neglect. Archivist Lev Var didn't notice it at first. He was halfway through a standard maintenance cycle, clearing expired contracts and reclassifying low-value records, when his system paused. Not an error, a hesitation. A small alert blinked in the corner of his display. Unresolved obligation detected. Lev frowned. That shouldn't happen. The system was designed to close debts automatically after 100 years if no claim was made. It had been that way for centuries. He opened the file. At first glance, it looked insignificant. Record type, emergency assistance. Origin, Cathari merchant vessel Silver Wake. Recipient, unknown vessel, unregistered at time of contact. Location, outer drift, Callus Expanse. Assistance provided, oxygen reserves, partial transfer. Nutrient packs, standard issue. Emergency reactor stabilizer. Navigation beacon calibration. Total cost, minimal. Debt status, pending. Lev leaned back. A routine kindness. One ship helping another in deep space. It happened all the time. Most species logged it, filed the debt, and forgot about it, which is exactly what had happened here, except the system hadn't closed it. That meant one thing. The recipient species had eventually been identified, and the debt had been formally acknowledged. Lev scrolled further. He found the species tag. He almost didn't react. He had seen thousands, but something made him pause. Maybe it was the way the system highlighted it, or maybe it was instinct. He opened the registry entry and read. Then he stopped, read it again, and didn't move for a long time. The species was listed as human. Lev Var did not like surprises. In 27 cycles of archive work, he had built his entire career on predictable outcomes. Humans were not predictable. He opened the full file. It was extensive, far larger than most species records, and heavily updated. He skimmed the summary. High-gravity origin world, extreme environmental variability, adaptive physiology, persistent social memory structures. Then he reached the behavioral notes and slowed. Humans do not abandon chosen conflicts. Humans exhibit unusually high tolerance for loss. Humans form long-term cultural memory around events of survival. Lev swallowed. That last line had a subnote. He opened it. Addendum. Human societies demonstrate a persistent pattern of tracking and honoring debts across multiple generations. These obligations are not treated as financial. They are treated as existential. Lev stared at the screen. Then, slowly, he reopened the original record. A merchant ship, the Silver Wake, a routine trade vessel. It had encountered a drifting craft in the Callus Expanse. No power, life support failing, crew in critical condition. The Cathari captain had logged the encounter in 6 sentences. 6. Lev read them carefully. Unknown vessel located adrift. Crew condition unstable but viable. Transferred surplus oxygen and supplies. Reactor stabilized temporarily. Provided navigation correction. Departed after ensuring system restart. That was it. No names, no ceremony, no significance. Just something that needed doing, and then they moved on. Lev checked the follow-up logs. There were none. The Silver Wake had continued its route, completed its contracts, returned home. Routine. Ordinary, forgotten. But the other ship, it had survived. Leff accessed external records. Public human databases were surprisingly open. He entered the old vessel's identifier. The system found it. Designation, Horizon Seed. Status, colony vessel. Outcome, successful settlement. Leff leaned forward. He kept reading. The colony had not only survived, it had expanded, prospered. Over 4 centuries, it had spread across multiple systems. Population derived from original vessel, 8.2 million individuals. Leff exhaled slowly. 8 million lives from one moment, one decision, one ship that stopped. He looked back at the debt record, still marked, pending, and suddenly, for the first time in his entire career, Leff Var did not feel like closing the file. Instead, he flagged it. Not routine, not administrative. He pushed it higher, past standard review, past department filters, all the way to the Cathari Diplomatic Council. He attached a note. It was short, carefully worded, but the hesitation in it was clear. This record may require immediate attention. I recommend reviewing the associated species file before taking action. He sent it, then leaned back and waited. Far away, across distances the Cathari charts barely tracked, a human clerk named Alina Reyes was doing her own routine work. Old records, cross-referencing, maintenance. Nothing important. Until she found a name. Silver Wake. She froze, then opened the file, read it once, then again. Then she whispered something under her breath. Not fear, not surprise, something else. Recognition. She flagged the record immediately. Her supervisor read it, didn't hesitate, didn't question. He simply opened a blank transmission window and began to type. The message was formal, polite, perfectly structured. No threat, no urgency, no emotion. It said, "This is the Human Colonial Authority. We have located a debt record associated with your people. We are coming to repay it. Please prepare to receive our delegation." Back in Cathari space, the message arrived within the hour. The council read both files, one from below, one from beyond. And for the first time in decades, they called an emergency session, because they had read the same line Leff had. Humans do not forget. And somewhere in the back of every mind in that chamber, the same quiet thought formed. What does repayment look like after 400 years? Outside their system, something was already moving. Not fast, not aggressive, not hidden, just deliberate and numerous, because when humans decide to repay a debt, they do not come empty-handed.
The Cathari had protocols for first contact. They had protocols for trade disputes, for piracy, for territorial violations, for military escalation. They did not have a protocol for this. The message from the humans had been clear, polite, measured, and completely impossible to categorize. We are coming to repay it. That sentence had been discussed for 6 straight hours in the emergency council chamber. Not the words themselves, the implications. What exactly does repay mean in this context? One counselor had asked. No one answered, because the answer depended on understanding humans, and no one in the room was confident they did. By the time the session adjourned, 3 decisions had been made. Do not refuse the meeting. Do not provoke. Prepare for uncertainty. That last one covered everything. 3 days later, the long-range sensors detected them. At first, it was just a distortion at the edge of scan range, then a pattern, then numbers, then silence across every monitoring station in Cathari space, because the number kept increasing. Confirm count, station control requested. The technician ran it twice, then a third time, then stopped speaking for several seconds. 38 vessels. A pause. Correction, 42. Another pause. 45. The count stabilized at 47 ships. They did not arrive in formation, not a military wedge, not an aggressive posture. They arrived organized, clean lines, wide spacing, every movement controlled, deliberate. No weapons signatures, no shield escalation, no targeting locks. And yet, every Cathari sensor operator felt the same thing. Pressure. Not from aggression, from presence. Identify ship classes, came the next order. The system struggled. Human ship design did not always match known categories, but it tried. Heavy carriers, long-range transports, diplomatic cruisers, logistics vessels, and something else. Several ships had no clear classification at all. "What are those?" a junior analyst whispered. No one answered. On the primary display, the fleet drifted into full visibility. 47 ships, each one marked with 2 symbols. The first was consistent, the Human Colonial Authority seal. The second varied slightly in design but shared the same core imagery. A circle, inside it, 2 hands, and beneath them, a set of balanced scales. Archivist Lefvar recognized it immediately. He had seen it buried in the human cultural file, a symbol rarely used, almost never displayed publicly. He pulled up the reference, read it, then felt something cold settle in his chest. Symbol of fulfilled obligation, used when repaying debts of survival or existential significance. Lef closed the file, slowly. "They brought the symbol," he said quietly. "What does that mean?" someone asked. Lef didn't answer right away, because he wasn't sure how to explain it without making it worse. "It means," he said carefully, "they believe this matters." That did not help. Across Cathari networks, the live feed spread rapidly. What had started as a restricted diplomatic alert became public within minutes, then interstellar. Other species began watching. Ambassador Kelrin of the Vosh Collective activated a broadcast channel. He had not intended to, but the moment demanded it. "We are observing a human fleet entering Cathari space," he said, voice controlled but tight. "They have filed all appropriate approach documentation." He paused, then added almost reluctantly, "All of it." His aide glanced at him. "That's good, isn't it?" Kelrin didn't look away from the screen. "That is exactly what concerns me." Back in Cathari orbit, Docking Station Prime had been cleared, fully. No civilian traffic, no cargo transfers, no unnecessary personnel. Delegate Saren Val stood at the observation deck. She had read the human file 3 times, then stopped reading, because it wasn't helping anymore. Nothing in the file explained this feeling. The fleet hung in space like something patient, not threatening, not peaceful, certain. Saren watched the lead ship adjust position. A diplomatic cruiser, according to classification. Smooth hull, minimal external weaponry, but massive. "Signal received," a technician said. "Docking request submitted." Saren nodded. "Approve it." Her voice did not shake, but her second heart beat faster. The docking corridor extended, slowly, mechanically. Everyone watched, across the station, across Cathari space, across multiple star systems. Hundreds of millions of viewers, waiting. The human ship aligned perfectly,
No correction needed, no hesitation. It connected. There was a soft, almost anticlimactic sound, and just like that, they had arrived. Inside the corridor, the pressure equalized, atmosphere stabilized, systems confirmed compatibility. Then, the inner hatch opened. No soldiers rushed out, no guards, no displays of force. Just 3 figures. The first stepped forward, human, tall by Cathari standards, composed, wearing a dark formal coat with a simple white edge along the collar. No visible weapons, no armor, but there was something in the way he moved. Not cautious, not aggressive, unhurried, as if time itself was not something he needed to chase. Behind him walked 2 others, a woman with sharp eyes and quiet curiosity, and the third, older, carrying a small sealed case. That case drew attention immediately. Not large, not heavy-looking, but carried carefully, deliberately, as if it mattered. Saren stepped forward to meet them. She had practiced the greeting in 4 languages. She used all of them. The human listened, did not interrupt. When she finished, he nodded once, then replied in flawless Cathari standard. "Thank you for receiving us, delegate." His voice was calm, measured. "We will not take more of your time than necessary." A slight pause. "We are here to complete an obligation." The words landed heavier than they should. Saren inclined her head, professional, controlled. "May we ask the nature of the repayment you intend to provide?" The human looked at her, then briefly at the sealed case. "It is significant," he said. Another pause. "But it is also simple." Saren waited. The human met her gaze steadily. 412 years ago, he said, your people chose to stop. The room was very quiet. He continued, "They gave us time, a breath. We have spent that time becoming something." He rested his hand lightly on the case. "We are here to return a portion of that." Somewhere in the station, Archivist Lethvar felt his hands go slightly unsteady, because he understood something now, something the Council had not fully grasped. This was not negotiation. This was not diplomacy. This was not even repayment in the traditional sense. This was closure. And humans, he realized, did not leave things unfinished. Outside, 47 ships held position, silent, ordered, patient, waiting not for permission, but for the moment they had been moving toward for over 4 centuries.
The room had been prepared for negotiation. That was the first mistake. The Cathari reception chamber was built for balance. Equal seating, neutral lighting, controlled acoustics. Everything designed to ensure that no side felt stronger than the other. But balance only worked when both sides were there to negotiate. The humans were not. Delegate Saren Val realized that the moment the doors closed behind them. There was no tension in the human delegation, no scanning glances, no subtle positioning, no attempts to control the room. They simply sat, as if they had already decided how this would end. The sealed case rested on the table between them, small, unremarkable, and yet it had become the center of the room. Every eye returned to it, again and again. Archivist Lethvar stood at the far side, hands folded tightly behind his back. He had not been meant to attend. Archivists did not sit in diplomatic chambers, but he had found the record, and now he could not look away from what it had become. The human who had spoken earlier placed his hand on the case, not opening it yet, just resting it there. "My name is Elias Wren," he said calmly. senior representative of the Human Colonial Authority. Saren inclined her head. Delegate Saren Val, Cathari Diplomatic Council. A brief pause. Formalities complete. Elias glanced once at the others in the room, then back to Saren. "With your permission," he said, "I would like to complete our purpose." Saren hesitated, not visibly, but internally, because something about the phrasing mattered. Not begin, complete. She nodded. "You may proceed." Elias placed his palm against the surface of the case. There was a faint sound, not mechanical, not digital, something softer. The case opened. No light spilled out, no projection activated, no advanced technology revealed itself. Inside, there was a book, a physical one. The room stilled. Even the observers watching remotely went quiet, because physical books were rare. Across most of the galaxy, information lived in data streams, neural archives, quantum storage. Books belonged to history, to museums, and yet, here one was, bound in dark material, edges worn, pages slightly uneven, old, carefully preserved. Elias lifted it with both hands, not of necessity, out of respect. He placed it gently on the table. "This," he said, "is the ledger of the Silver Wake debt." Lethvar felt something tighten in his chest. "A ledger?" asked Saren quietly. Elias nodded. "It has been maintained continuously since the day your ship saved ours." A small shift in the room. "Continuously?" Saren repeated. "For 412 years, Elias confirmed. Silence. Dara Solis, the woman beside him, activated a small translation field. Soft light hovered above the book. Elias opened it. The first page crackled slightly. Age. Real age. The writing was small, precise, careful. The translation rendered it clearly. Day 9. Systems failing. Oxygen critical. A pause. We have been found. No one moved. Elias turned the page. Unknown vessel. Cathari origin. They did not ask for payment. They did not ask for identity. They helped. Another page. A different handwriting, slightly less steady. We will record this. We will not lose it. If we survive, this will matter. Elias let the words sit in the air. Then he spoke again. These were written by a systems engineer named Mara Ilyan, he said. She was 26 years old at the time. He turned another page. More entries. Different names. Different hands. Years passing. Decades. Each entry building on the last. Not just records. Memories. First harvest successful. Children born. Colony stable. We are still here. Leth swallowed. Elias turned further. The handwriting changed again. Cleaner. Modern. The ledger did not remain a record of survival, he said. It became a record of meaning. He placed his hand lightly on the open page. We began to calculate. Dara activated her slate. A projection appeared above the table. A branching structure. It expanded outwards, rapidly, lines splitting into thousands, then millions, then millions. The number stabilized. 8,200,000. The room went completely silent. Saren did not speak. Could not. Elias continued. We asked a simple question, he said. His voice remained calm, but something deeper sat beneath it now. What portion of that belongs to you? Leth felt it then,
fully. The weight, not of the number, but of the question. Elias turned deeper into the ledger. The pages changed again. Structured, deliberate. This was no longer memory. This was accounting. "Everything that follows," he said, "is our answer." He began to read. Adaptive agricultural systems, 4 centuries of human crop engineering designed for unstable environments. Dara added, fully translated, compatible with Cathari biospheres. A pause. Medical archives, Elias continued, 300 years of xenobiological research. Another pause. Energy stabilization frameworks, derived from early colony failures. Saren's breath slowed, because she was beginning to understand. This wasn't symbolic. This wasn't ceremonial. This was real. Elias turned one final section, and one more, he said. The room seemed to tighten, a defensive accord. Now people reacted. Human military response, Elias said evenly, to any direct threat against Cathari systems. A beat. For a duration of 50 standard years. Someone in the back of the chamber made a small, involuntary sound. Saren finally spoke. "This is," she began, then stopped, because there were no correct words. "This exceeds any reasonable measure of debt," she finished carefully. Elias met her gaze. "Yes," he said. No hesitation. "No one would have expected this," she added. Another pause. Elias closed the ledger gently. "No," he agreed. Then, for the first time, there was something in his voice. Not emotion, but something close to it. "Because what you gave us," he said, "was not measured in supplies." He rested his hand on the book. "You gave us continuation." The room held its breath. "You cannot repay that with something small." Silence. Deep. Complete. Across the galaxy, hundreds of millions of viewers watched without speaking, because they understood now this was not about power, not about influence, not about strategy. This was about something far older, something most species had forgotten how to measure. A single act of kindness carried forward for 400 years and returned, not equally, but meaningfully. In the corner of the room, Archivist Leftvar closed his eyes briefly, because he realized something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. The file had never been small. It had only looked that way because no one had followed it far enough. Elias stood. "We are prepared to transfer all materials immediately." A pause, "and to remain until the obligation is fulfilled." Saren looked at him, then at the ledger, then at the projection still hovering above the table. 8.2 million lives, all traced back to one moment, one decision, one ship that stopped. And finally, she understood why the humans had come with 47 ships, not for protection, not for intimidation, but because anything less would have been insufficient.
For a long time, no one spoke. Not in the chamber, not on the broadcasts, not even across the millions of viewers watching from distant systems, because there was nothing left to argue. The humans had not made an offer. They had not proposed terms. They had not asked for agreement. They had simply answered a question no one else had thought to ask. What is a life worth? And more importantly, what is millions of them worth when they exist because someone chose to help? Delegate Saren Val finally moved. It was a small thing, just her hands shifting slightly on the table. But in that room, it felt enormous. "You said," she began carefully, "that this is a portion of the debt." Elias Wren inclined his head. "Yes." Saren held his gaze. "And the rest?" There was no challenge in her voice, no accusation, just the need to understand. Elias was quiet for a moment, not searching for words, choosing them. "The rest," he said, "cannot be transferred." A pause. "It is carried." The words settled differently than everything that had come before. Saren felt it. So did everyone else. "You mean," she said slowly, "memory?" Elias nodded once. "Memory, teaching, obligation." Dara Solis spoke softly beside him. "We don't close these records," she said. "Not ever." She gestured lightly toward the ledger. "This doesn't end today." A quiet ripple moved through the room. "Then what happens now?" Saren asked. Elias answered immediately. "Now," he said, "we make sure it is shared." Outside the chamber, the galaxy was already reacting. Ambassador Kelrin had stopped speaking mid-broadcast nearly 10 minutes ago, not because he had nothing to say, because anything he said felt smaller than what was happening. His aide finally leaned closer. "You should continue," she whispered. Kelrin exhaled slowly, then looked back at the feed. "I want to be precise," he said. His voice had changed, less sharp, more careful. "What we are witnessing is not diplomacy in the conventional sense." He paused. "This is cultural expression." Another pause. "And I do not believe we have a framework for it." Across multiple systems, analysts began rewriting reports in real time. The categories didn't fit. Not trade, not alliance, not coercion, not deterrence. Something else, something older, something uncomfortable, because it implied a question most species had stopped asking themselves. What do we owe to those who helped us when it mattered? Back in the chamber, the formal process resumed. Not negotiation, not exactly, but acknowledgement. The Cathari Council representatives began reviewing the materials: agricultural systems, medical archives, energy frameworks, each one independently verified, each one real, not symbolic, not inflated, functional, immediate, valuable. Saren found herself reading without speaking, because every page she opened made the same point. The humans had not exaggerated. If anything, they had been conservative. Archivist Leth Var stood silently watching. This was no longer about the file. This was about something much larger. And yet, he couldn't stop thinking about it. That small alert, that single line. Unresolved obligation detected. He almost laughed, because now he understood. It had never been unresolved. It had simply been waiting. Hours passed. At some point, food was brought in. No one touched it. At another point, someone suggested a break. No one took it, because no one wanted to be the one to step away from something this rare. Eventually, the Cathari High Council transmitted their response. It was brief, formal, carefully worded, but the meaning was unmistakable. The Cathari people accept the repayment in principle. We acknowledge the significance of the act. We will proceed with integration and formalization immediately. The message was sent, and across the galaxy,
something shifted. Because acceptance meant something important. It meant this was no longer a story. It was precedent. 3 days later, the first transfers began. Human agricultural systems integrated into Cathari colonies. Within weeks, crop yields stabilized in regions that had struggled for decades. Medical archives followed. Treatments once considered impossible became routine. Diseases that had persisted for generations simply stopped. The Defense Accord was signed quietly. No celebration, no announcement beyond formal channels, but every major power noticed, because the meaning was clear. To harm the Cathari now was to invite a response from humanity, and after what they had just witnessed, no one was eager to test that. But the most important change was not material. It was cultural. Across the galaxy, old records began to resurface. Archived aid logs, forgotten aid, unanswered kindness. Things that had once been dismissed as minor were suddenly being looked at differently. Archivists, quiet, overlooked workers, became the center of attention because they held something no one else had tracked properly. Memory. Lethvar received 312 messages in the first week. Other archivists, other systems, other species, all asking the same question. What did you see? He answered each one the same way. I didn't see it, he wrote. A pause. I almost deleted it. On the far side of Cathari space, the human fleet remained, still, patient, not because they were needed, but because they had said they would stay until the obligation was fulfilled. On one of the lower decks of the lead ship, crew members gathered in long rows, eating, talking, laughing quietly. A Cathari observer assigned to monitor the fleet filed her report. No unusual activity detected. She paused, then added a personal note. Crew behavior indicates calm. Another pause. She hesitated before finishing. Possibly relief. Back in the chamber, as the final documents were prepared, Sarenval found herself looking at the ledger again. Not the data, not the numbers. The first page, the old handwriting. We have been found. She closed the book gently, then looked at Elias. There is one thing I still don't understand, she said. Elias waited. Saren chose her words carefully. This record was not active. It was not demanded. It was not even remembered on our side. A pause. You could have left it. The room went very still, because that was the question, the real one. Why come back for something no one was asking for? Elias looked at her, and for the first time, there was no distance in his expression, only something steady, certain. We don't wait to be asked, he said, a quiet breath, because the moment we needed help, he rested his hand on the ledger. You didn't wait either. The answer settled into the room, simple, unavoidable. And in that moment, Sarenval understood something that would change the way her people thought forever. Kindness was not a transaction. It was a chain. And the humans had simply refused to let it break. Outside, 47 ships held their position, silent, not as a show of force, but as a promise kept.
3 months later, the galaxy was still trying to name what had happened. The official classifications failed. Some called it a diplomatic anomaly. Others labeled it a cultural event. A few tried to define it as a strategic expansion of influence.
None of them fit, because every definition tried to shrink it into something manageable, something familiar, and it wasn't. At the Galactic Council, 17 separate proposals had been submitted, each one attempting to categorize the human action, each one debated, none of them accepted, not officially. But one kept being quoted. A short report submitted by Counselor Yavara of the Inner Ring. It read, "This was not a new phenomenon. It is an old one we stopped recognizing." A pause. The humans did not introduce something new. They reminded us of something we forgot to value. Another pause. Recommended action: pay closer attention to small things. The proposal was rejected, but no one forgot it. On Cathari Prime, Delegate Seren Val submitted her final report, 87 pages, precise, detailed. It covered the fleet, the materials, the agreements, the cultural implications. Her supervisor read it in full, then asked a simple question: summarize it. Seren took 2 days, not because she didn't understand, because she did, and that made it harder. When she finally submitted the summary, it was 1 paragraph. The humans did not come to impress us. They did not come to display power. They came because a record existed, and they believed it should not remain unanswered. A line break. The scale of the repayment was large, but the reason for it was simple. Another. They were taught that survival given by another carries weight. Final line. They have spent 4 centuries making sure that weight was not forgotten. Her supervisor approved it without edits. Archivist Lef Var returned to his work. The archive had not changed, still quiet, still slow, still full of things no one thought about anymore. But Lef had changed. He read differently now, more carefully. He checked species tags before closing files. He paused at small entries. He stopped assuming that insignificant meant unimportant. In the months that followed, he flagged 9 more records. 7 were minor, no living parties, no action required. 2 were not. 1 involved a mining vessel that had once provided shelter to a damaged human survey crew. The other, a medical outpost that had treated a single injured human traveler nearly a century ago. Leth sent both upward with the same note: please read the species tag first. Across the galaxy, similar moments were happening, quiet ones. An archivist pausing before deletion, a clerk reopening an old file, a supervisor choosing to forward something instead of dismiss it. Small decisions, the kind no one recorded, the kind that usually didn't matter. Except now, they did. On the edge of human-controlled space, Dara Solis finalized her own report. She wrote late, long after the formal work was done, because she wanted to get it right. Her words were simpler than the official documents, more direct. The galaxy was afraid when we arrived. A pause. That's reasonable. Fear is what you feel when something doesn't fit your expectations. Another pause. What matters is what comes after. She stopped, then added one final line. If they understand, it won't be fear next time. Ren read it over her shoulder. He didn't comment, which meant he agreed. Back on Cathari Prime, a new entry was added to the Memorial of Recognized Service. A list of names, not politicians, not generals, a merchant crew, the Silver Wake. Every individual who had been on board the day they stopped. The entry was short, no embellishment, no dramatic language, just a record. Provided aid to a distressed vessel in the Kalis expanse. Assistance resulted in the survival and continuation of a human colony line. That was all, but it was enough. Lef Var visited the memorial once. He stood in front of the names, looked at them, people who had lived ordinary lives, made an ordinary decision, and never knew what it became. He stayed there longer than he intended, then returned to work, because that
he realized, was how this continued, not through grand gestures, but through quiet ones. Far out in deep space, in a small administrative office on a mid-level world, a clerk named Joran was doing routine processing. Old files, low priority. He almost skipped one. It looked like nothing. A minor assistance record, short duration, minimal cost, forgotten. His finger hovered over the delete command. Then he paused. Not because of the file itself, because of something he remembered. A story, something about humans. He opened the record, read the species tag, and sat back slowly. Across the stars, a new message began to form. Polite, formal, carrying no threat. This is the Human Colonial Authority. We have located a debt record associated with your people. We are coming to repay it. Please prepare to receive our delegation. Somewhere else, another archivist hesitated before closing a file. Somewhere else, someone chose to remember. And slowly, quietly, the galaxy began to change. Not because of power, not because of fear, but because one species had decided that kindness, no matter how small, should always be answered. And once that idea existed, it became very hard to ignore. Because every civilization had its own forgotten records, its own small moments, its own quiet acts that had never been repaid. And now they had a choice. Ignore them, or follow the example of the species that never forgot. Far out in deep space, a human ship altered course, not urgently, not dramatically, just enough to reach something that had been waiting. Because somewhere in the dark, another story had started.